Hello and welcome to anyone who's new to the channel. If you've seen any of my videos before, welcome back. In this one I'm going to be showing you how I've made this three-piece wooden puzzle that just consists of three of the same size pieces of wood that all slot together to create the puzzle basically. I'm going to do a separate video just on how to put it together and take it apart, so if you're just interested in that, just go down to my page and find that video. But for now, I'll show you how I made it. So I'm going to be using a 12mm drill bit, so I've machined some timber down to be just thinner than 12mm. Then I've ripped this to 36mm, which is just 3 times the thickness. Then I'll cut this to 108mm long, which again is 3 times the width. I use a stop block whenever possible just to get consistent cuts and to make sure that they're all going to be exactly the same. Now when using a miter saw with a stop block, you want to make sure that the blade completely stops before you lift the saw up, just to stop any kickback. I'll flip the board over between each cut just to make sure the fibres of the wood aren't getting stuck between the fence and the timber. I'm cutting enough pieces here for 2 puzzles altogether, and then I'll keep the bit at the end just so I can use that as a tester. And again here, just so you can see that the width is 3 times the thickness and the length is 3 times the width. So I'll be using a 12mm Forstner bit for this. Now I've made a simple jig here just with a couple of pieces of MDF nailed down at 90 degrees, and I'll be using a hold down clamp just to hold it in place. Here I'm just marking the locations for the screws, and then I'll use a drill bit that's just smaller than the shank of the screw to pre-drill the holes. I'm just screwing these down with some 32mm drywall screws, and these are slightly too long, but I'll just flip it over and snap these off with a hammer, which you're about to see here. Now I'll just mark the center point, and using a marking gauge to just confirm that it is center. To confirm that your marking gauge is actually in the center, I'll set it to the line, and then I'll put it from each side and make sure that it lines up in the same position. If your divots from the marking gauge line up exactly the same like this, then you know that your gauge is marked dead center. I'm just using another one of the timbers here just to mark the start and stop point of the mortises that I'm about to drill out. Then I'll use the marker gauge just to score a center mark between those 2 lines. Now I'll clamp one of the pieces into the jig. Now you should always make sure that you spend some time setting your jigs in the correct location to make sure that all your holes are going to be exactly the same and where they need to be. I'm going to be lining up the center of the Forstner bit with the center mark that I scored, and the edge of the Forstner bit will come just up to the line that I marked earlier, which will be the edge of the mortise. Now here you'll drill 1 hole all the way through, unclamp it, flip it around 180 degrees, clamp it back into place, and then drill the 2nd hole all the way through again. Now with each puzzle that you're making, you'll need to have 2 of them with the holes drilled on both sides, and you'll also need 1 of them with the hole drilled on only one side, as you'll see in a minute. And now you can see what I'm left with, and this is enough for 2 puzzles. Now I'm just going to pull the line down just to connect all the holes together to know what material I'm going to be removing later. And using a square, I'll just mark a line from the underside of the 1st hole and the top side of the 2nd hole, so basically between the 2 holes over to one side, and I'll have to remove this from a couple of the pieces, which you will see in a minute. Now here I'm just setting up a stop block so the bandsaw blade lines up with the mark that I just did with the square. And here I'm just clamping an offcut to the fence just to act as the stop block. Now some of you who are paying attention might be asking why I didn't use the stop block that's actually attached to the fence, and the answer to that is I have no idea why I didn't use it. I just didn't think about it at the time and I clamped a stop block to it, which was a more complicated way to go about it. Now here I'm also clamping a block to the fence at the side just to stop me from cutting too far into the timber. Now the reason why I actually ended up making these is my son saw these whilst out shopping and he asked if we could buy one. I told him that I can make him one in the shop instead. Now it was £18 in the shop and I spent about 4 hours working on making these, so it's not a cheaper option, but I know when I make him things he actually enjoys playing with them and he likes them a lot more than when we just buy him stuff from the shop. Now I got a bit ahead of myself when I was cutting these and I actually cut into one that didn't need a slot. But as I was just making these for home, I decided to leave the slit in there, and just as a reminder that we all make mistakes. Then back over to the drill press to remove as much of the waste material as I can with the forcing a bit. Now just clean everything else out up to the lines with a chisel. Now when you're cleaning out the rest of the material like this with a chisel, you want to go halfway through from one side, then flip the piece over and finish clearing it out from the opposite side. If you do try to go all the way through one side, you'll more than likely end up splitting out the other side. Now here I've just clamped my router down to the table with a 6mm round over bit in it. I've got the fence lined up with the ball bearing just so it all runs through. Now as long as you keep your fingers away from the router bit, which is what I'm using this push block for, it's not actually that dangerous, but only do this if you feel safe doing it. I'm doing this so it'll round over the edges of the timber so it'll fit into the mortises. Another option, you can leave all your timbers square and then square off your mortises instead. And that is what I'm looking for there, so I'm just going to do that on both sides so it'll fit nicely into the mortises. Now if you don't feel safe doing it this way, my friend over at Made by Mange has recently done a video showing an attachment for a palm router that would solve this for you. I'll see if I can put a link to the video or at least to his page in the description. Now this is what it's looking like at this stage, just got a little bit of cleaning up to do and they'll be done. Now I just use a spindle sander to clean up the inside. If you don't have a spindle sander, I used to use just a piece of sandpaper wrapped around a pen or a pencil to clean up the small edges like this. And yes, I am kneeling on the floor whilst using my spindle sander, as I have quite a small shop and this is stored in one of my base units and I'm not bothered to keep lifting it up to put it on the work surface every time. Then a final bit of hand sanding just to finish it all off. Now I'm just going to put a beeswax and mineral oil finish that I make on it just so it feels a bit nicer, looks a bit better, and it should actually make the pieces slide together a little bit easier as well. I started by using a bit of shop towel to apply it all, but that just ended up getting in the way, so I just applied it by hand after. Then I went back to use a bit of shop towel just to wipe off any excess finish. And that's them finished. Now I'm going to quickly put them together just so you can see that they all go together, but like I said, I'll make a separate video where you can see a bit easier how to get it all together. And that's it for this one. Thanks for watching and you'll see me in the next one.